She said yes in a restaurant in downtown Chicago, and for a few seconds, nothing else in the world existed except the ring on her finger and the man kneeling in front of her. The ring cost $38,000. He'd spent 11 months secretly saving for it, working extra shifts, selling a motorcycle he loved, putting himself quietly into a small amount of debt he hadn't told her about yet. Everyone who saw the photos that night said the same thing: he really loves her. Look how much he spent. 400 miles away, another man knelt in a kitchen, holding a ring that cost $1,200. It had been his grandmother's setting, reset with a new stone they'd picked out together at a small jeweler neither of them had heard of before that week. Nobody posted about it. Nobody commented on how much he loved her based on a price tag, because there wasn't one to discuss. 11 years later, only one of those marriages is still intact. You can probably guess which one, and you're probably wrong about why. This isn't a story about cheap versus expensive or frugal versus extravagant. It's a story about what a single financial decision, made before two people are even legally married, reveals about how they'll handle every financial decision after that. Today we're going to look at the actual research behind engagement ring spending and divorce risk, why the relationship is so much stronger than anyone expects, and what it's actually measuring underneath the surface, because it's not what you think. Let's start with the number that made researchers sit up. A study out of Emory University, tracking thousands of married couples, found that men who spent between $2,000 and $4,000 on an engagement ring had a substantially higher risk of divorce than men who spent under $1,000. Spend more on the ring, and on average, your marriage was statistically less likely to survive. Not slightly less likely, meaningfully less likely. The same study found that lavish wedding spending overall, not just the ring, correlated with shorter marriages, while a modest, low-cost wedding correlated with a marriage that tended to last longer. This finding is uncomfortable, because it cuts directly against everything the entire engagement industry has spent a century building. The idea that you should spend a month's salary on a ring isn't a tradition, it's a marketing campaign. In the early 20th century, diamond engagement rings were a niche purchase. Then an advertising firm built one of the most successful campaigns in history around a single idea: a diamond is forever, and the size of the stone should reflect the size of your love. Within a generation, a month's salary became cultural law, even though nobody had ever paid that much before the campaign existed. The number wasn't financial advice. It was copy written to move product. So when researchers found that spending more actually correlated with worse outcomes, they weren't disproving some ancient wisdom. They were exposing a manufactured one. But here's where it gets more interesting than diamonds are a scam. The ring spending number isn't really measuring the ring. It's measuring something underneath it, a pattern of financial decision-making that shows up again and again throughout a relationship, and the ring is just the first visible data point. Think about what it actually takes to spend $40,000 on a ring relative to your income. For most people, that means one of three things. You're either independently wealthy enough that the amount is trivial, you've taken on debt to make a statement, or you've drained savings that were earmarked for something else: a house, an emergency fund, a future. The first scenario is rare. The second and third scenarios are common, and they share a common thread: prioritizing a single emotionally charged purchase over financial stability. Because the emotional payoff of the moment outweighed the practical cost of the decision. That pattern doesn't appear once and disappear. People who make financial decisions based on emotional intensity and social signaling in one moment tend to make financial decisions the same way in the next moment, and the one after that. The honeymoon gets upgraded because it feels like it should match the proposal. The wedding venue gets upgraded because the ring already signaled a certain standard. The house offer goes in $20,000 over asking because backing down feels like losing. None of these decisions are about the actual dollar amount. They're about a decision-making style that consistently prioritizes how a choice looks and feels over whether it's sound. Compare that to the couple who spent $1,200 on a reset family ring. That decision required a different kind of negotiation. It required two people sitting down and asking, what actually matters to us here, the symbol or the sentiment, the size of the stone or the story behind it? It required at least one person being comfortable enough to say, I don't need to perform this for an audience, and a partner who agreed. That's not a financial decision. That's a relationship operating system, and it's the same operating system that later asks, do we actually need the bigger house, or are we trying to keep up with people we don't even like? Researchers have a term for this broader pattern, conspicuous consumption as a relationship variable. It's not specific to weddings. It shows up in car purchases, home renovations, vacation spending, even gift giving between partners. The couples who consistently choose the option that signals status over the option that reflects their actual values and actual financial situation tend to accumulate more financial stress over the life of the marriage. Financial stress, in turn, is one of the most consistently cited predictors of divorce across virtually every major study on the topic, more predictive than disagreements about religion, parenting style, or even how often a couple argues. Money isn't just a sensitive subject. It's often the proxy for a much deeper compatibility question. Can these two people make decisions together that serve their future rather than their image in the present? There's a second layer to this that researchers have only recently started untangling: the role of social pressure and external validation in the decision itself. Many of the highest ring expenditures in these studies weren't driven primarily by the couple's own preference. They were driven by anticipated judgment. What will her friends think if the ring is small? What will his coworkers say if he didn't go big? The purchase wasn't really a gift between two people. It was a performance for an audience that wasn't even in the room. This matters because a relationship that begins with a major financial decision oriented around an external audience is, from day one, importing other people's expectations into the foundation of the marriage. And couples who struggle to set financial boundaries against outside expectations during the engagement tend to keep struggling with exactly that boundary for years afterward. The in-laws who expect a certain kind of holiday spending, the friend group whose vacations always cost more than planned. The unspoken competition with siblings over whose kids get the better summer camp. The ring is the opening scene of a recurring movie. Whose expectations are we actually living by, ours or everyone else's? None of this means a couple who spends a lot on a ring is doomed, and it doesn't mean a couple who spends almost nothing is automatically safe. The data is a correlation, not a prophecy, and the researchers themselves are careful to say so. What the ring spending actually predicts isn't the marriage's fate directly. It's a higher likelihood of two underlying patterns: financial decision-making driven by image rather than alignment, and vulnerability to outside social pressure at the exact moments that call for the most internal clarity. Couples who recognize either pattern in themselves can absolutely change course. The data isn't a verdict, it's a mirror, and most people have simply never been shown it. So what does a financially healthy version of this moment actually look like, if not spend less, as a blanket rule? It looks like a conversation neither partner is afraid to have before the ring is ever purchased. What can we comfortably afford without touching savings we'll need later? And are we buying this because we want it, or because we're worried about how its absence will be perceived? Couples who can have that conversation honestly, whatever number they land on, are demonstrating the exact skill that will determine whether they can later have honest conversations about a mortgage, a job loss, a medical bill, or a child's college fund. The ring conversation is a test run for every financial conversation the marriage will ever require. And most couples don't realize they're taking the test until years later when they're failing a much bigger version of it. There's a quieter, more hopeful version of this finding that rarely makes the headlines next to expensive rings predict divorce: couples who spend modestly and consciously on engagement. and who can articulate clearly why they made that choice together. Report something researchers weren't even measuring directly, but kept noticing anyway. Higher relationship satisfaction in the years immediately following the wedding. Not because the ring was small, because the decision-making process behind it was collaborative, honest, and rooted in their actual circumstances rather than an imagined audience. The ring size was a symptom, the collaboration was the cause. If you're approaching this decision yourself, here's the actual takeaway, stripped of moralizing. The size of the diamond was never the variable that mattered. The variable that matters is whether the decision to buy it, whatever it costs, was made by two people who were honest with each other about money, immune to outside performance pressure, and willing to choose alignment over appearance. That skill, practiced once at the very beginning of a marriage, tends to repeat itself for decades. And the absence of that skill, also practiced once at the very beginning, tends to repeat itself too, usually in far more expensive and far more painful ways than a ring ever could. The man who knelt in the restaurant with a $38,000 ring and the man who knelt in the kitchen with his grandmother's reset stone weren't being tested on how much they loved their partners. They were being tested on whether they could make a major financial decision honestly, together, without an audience. Only one of those tests was about to be retaken, over and over, for the rest of their lives.